Hi, my name is John Messina, and I'm a computer scientist and senior member of the Cloud Computing Program at the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Today I'm going to give a brief talk about the role of standards and their benefits for cloud computing, which is not something most people typically think about. Now, the first benefit from standards and cloud computing is really defining what cloud computing is. Remote services and resources in computer science have been around for well over 30 years. It's really how they're combined uniquely today that we get cloud computing. It's the understanding that we have a common set of essential characteristics that define cloud computing. Whether it's the on-demand self-service where a person can initiate action in the cloud by themselves, or the concept of elasticity where the resources provided to the customer can grow or shrink as needed to meet their business needs. You also have the aspect of what is actually being provided to the customer. Is it software as a service, or platform as a service, or infrastructure as a service? And finally, there's a third attribute to the definition of cloud computing, which really defines how a cloud is deployed. That's where we're talking about public clouds or private clouds, which is really representative of the shared level of concerns that the participants in a cloud actually have in common. So those are three very distinct attributes of cloud computing that combine into the complex definition of cloud computing. So it makes sense that we want a common understanding for the people in the industry so they can have meaningful dialogues moving forward. NIST started the process in our development of our special publication 800-145, which really defined cloud computing, which is one of the more commonly accepted definitions of cloud computing. But it was recognized that since cloud computing is considered without borders and you might be accessing services in different countries around the world, we needed an international standard of what cloud computing is. To that end, the ISO IEC JTC1 started a process and has now delivered an international standard on cloud computing overview and vocabulary that will allow us to have a meaningful dialogue for cloud computing moving forward. Now, the second way in which standards play a beneficial role in cloud computing really has to do with the adoption of cloud computing. Whenever somebody is considering adopting a new technology, there's a risk associated with it, and you have to decide whether or not the risks are within your accepted limits and tolerance. Cloud computing is no different. You have all these people who are considering moving to cloud computing, but they want to make certain the risks are manageable. To that end, NIST was actually tasked by the United States federal government to help identify and speed up adoption of cloud computing. And in the process, we identified 10 high-level concerns that are really holding people back from adopting cloud computing. And I'm going to talk about service-level agreements, which was one of those 10s. Service-level agreements, or SLAs, is the subservient portion of a cloud service contract. It really defines the guarantees that a cloud service provider is making to a customer. The idea is that you need to understand what's the underlying guarantees. And unfortunately, there's no standards in service level agreements out there in industry. If you go out there and look from multiple providers, they're all over the map. It's really like comparing apples to oranges to footballs. They have different metrics, terminologies, vocabularies, they provide different guarantees. So it makes it really hard for a customer to objectively compare services. In fact, you might have identical services from multiple providers, but the differences are in the underlying SLAs, and they're so different you can't objectively compare them. So that certainly leads to the fact that the customers still have a lot of risk associated with it. Now, the best way to address that would be, of course, to develop an international standard on service-level agreements. And industries and governments around the world have coalesced and liked that idea. And now within the ISO IEC JTC1, we actually have a three-part service-level agreement standard in process where it's going to define what is a service level agreement, what are the metrics that can be used in a cloud service agreement, as well as any requirements that would then be associated with that given SLA. Now, the third way in which standards really help with cloud computing and benefit from it is the concept of unleashing the full potential of cloud computing. Right now we have a world where you have individual silos of cloud computing provided by certain cloud service providers. And it's fine, we have a fairly large industry. However, it has not reached the full potential, and I want to give you two examples of how that's true. Right now, the primary reason that most people adopt cloud computing is for savings. The idea is that they will only pay for a service that they're using and nothing more. That's the whole measured service attribute of cloud computing. Unfortunately, associated with that is the understanding that most customers want to be able to go where the value is. And the idea is that you might start off with one cloud service provider, but the value position would then change to another cloud service provider later. And you need the mechanisms to be able to move from one cloud service provider to another. And unfortunately, those portability standards don't currently exist. Right now, it's very hard for a customer to pull their data back out of the cloud, let alone move it to another cloud service provider. And that's one example of where you need portability standards to reach the full potential of cloud computing, at least from the customer's point of view. The second attribute has to deal with elasticity. Now, the idea is that from the consumer's point of view, there's a near infinite amount of resources available on a given demand from the cloud service provider. From the cloud service provider's point of view, they have a very fixed amount of resources. Now, what happens if the customer demands resources that the cloud service provider can't guarantee at the moment? What they would do is something called cloud bursting, which is the ability to go out and temporarily acquire cloud services from another cloud service provider. Unfortunately, to do that, you need interoperability standards. Certainly, we have a case where some cloud service providers have negotiated agreements with other cloud service providers, but it is certainly not ubiquitous and available to everyone. We are looking at the future of the cloud down the road where we don't just want individual silos of cloud computing. You want a seamless integration, a federation of clouds that will allow people to make full use of cloud computing. So those are just 3 ways in which standards really have a beneficial role with regard to cloud computing. They help define what cloud computing is, they have standards in development which will make adoption a lot easier, and they're laying the groundwork for this future federation of clouds.